Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbart Gaming. Today I've got a review of a modern retro release for you, The Last Ninja Collection, available on all modern platforms. Those of you who are old fogies like me may have played these games when they were new. Some of you may know them from the slightly more modern and comedic look at them done by AVGN years ago. What you may not know is that, according to the publisher System 3, this series has sold over 20 million copies in its lifetime. Join me today for some quick thoughts on this title that includes not only several The Last Ninja games, but also another 3 Ninja-adjacent bonus games from System 3 as well. In the interest of full disclosure, this game was provided for review to me by the publisher. They aren't seeing any of the review in advance, have no input into it, or any say at all. All the wild and possibly insane thoughts you're about to hear are entirely my own. Alright, let's get on with it. Most fans of the Last Ninja titles in particular are probably most familiar with the Commodore 64 versions of the game. In fact, several places list the original Last Ninja as the best-selling Commodore 64 game of all time. I haven't been able to independently verify that, but it's definitely in the realm of possibility. If you're new to the channel or retro gaming in general, this was the C64, at least the original model. It was an 8-bit computer that had pretty advanced graphics and very advanced sound for when it was released in 1982. I've covered plenty of C64 games on the channel in the past, so if you want to see what it's like in general, I'll leave a few links for recommended viewing below in the description. One other tidbit about the Commodore 64 is that it was, and technically still is, the best-selling single-model computer of all time. Now, the Last Ninja series, as I mentioned, was pretty popular in its time, so a few entries are also available for other platforms like the Commodore Amiga and the ZX Spectrum. And yes, I said ZX instead of ZX. Why? Because I'm not from a country that pronounces the letter Z as Z. And before you get angry at me for that, please consider this. The Z80 processor inside that machine was developed in America and is an American product, but I don't hassle anyone from countries that pronounce it Z80 instead of Z80, and I don't demand they pronounce it my way. The anger in the retro community over people pronouncing the ZX Spectrum in that manner is silly and just needs to go away. So if pointing out a little hypocrisy helps get us there, well, I'm gonna do that. Alright, tangent aside, System 3's The Last Ninja Collection includes the first 3 numbered games in the series, along with Ninja Remix, which we'll talk about shortly. In this collection, you get the C64 versions of each game, and when applicable, you'll also get the Spectrum and Amiga versions. Now, the Amiga version of Ninja Remix is a port of the original C64 Last Ninja to that platform. However, Ninja Remix for the Commodore 64 is a modified version of that platform's version of The Last Ninja 2. Yeah, a little confusing, I know, but you'll be okay. Also, you can choose which version of any game to play from its individual home screen. Now, I mentioned you'll also get a few other non-The Last Ninja games. These include the Amiga and C64 versions of Bangkok Nights, the C64 and Spectrum versions of International Karate, and the Amiga, Spectrum, and C64 versions of that game's pretty awesome follow-up, IK+. Now, as you can see here, the presentation in this collection is pretty nice and mostly on par with other modern retro game collections. Each game gets a dedicated home screen, including some review accolades they'd earned long ago, the ability to play any included version of each game. You also get the option to save any game in progress. You get to view sort of a quick control card, and you get to look at the instructions for each game. You won't find anything earth-shattering in this collection's interface, but it looks nice enough and is functional, so it won't get in the way of anyone enjoying its games. As for those games themselves, they're a faithful emulation of the original titles and seem free of noticeable sound issues or input lag. Several of these games are a smidge on the slower pace side anyway, so I didn't expect that to be a huge deal, and thankfully, it's not. Faster-paced titles in the collection like IK+ were just fine as well. Now, loading saved games is a bit inconvenient. You have to quit a game in progress, back out to its home screen, then click the load option, and then gameplay resumes. Now, I don't know if this was done maybe to prevent save scumming, but come on guys, let me save and load whenever I want. I've been able to do that in unofficial emulators for the last 35-ish years at this point. I also wish they had added options for a few more modern conveniences like rewinding, control remapping, or even the option to turn off the splash screen and stuff to quick launch into a game, but none of those things are here. One thing they did include, however, was the ability to apply a couple of CRT filters. One just kind of looks like a general CRT, and the other is specifically made to look like a crappy old TV. Despite my age, I am a clean pixel kind of guy, so I never use these, but you might dig them. One last quick note, I'm reviewing the Steam version of the collection here, but this should be basically the same across all platforms. Alright, onto the games themselves now. Reviewing a collection like this can be a little tough, because if you have zero nostalgia for these games and didn't play them back when they were new, chances are you are going to like them or maybe even appreciate them now. So here's the first game in the series, The Last Ninja on the Commodore 64. When it came out, it was a pretty innovative isometric martial arts action/adventure/puzzle game. I was hoping they might have included some control updates, but nope, we have to play this one just like we did in the before times. Which is a bit of a shame since we have 10 plus action buttons on controllers these days. It would have been nice to assign a dedicated jump button, a button for punch/weapon, another for kick, another to pick up items, etc. But nope, these games rely on their original single button control schemes with a few minor exceptions that are present to make up for the lack of a keyboard. So the original Last Ninja takes place on a fictional isolated island and is a little tough since you have a limited number of lives and the levels are littered with infamously difficult to judge jumps. If you miss most of these jumps, you're dead. They serve as one-hit kills. You don't even get a shadow under your character while you're in the air to help you judge your position or where you're landing. And that's pretty frustrating. It's been quite a while since I played this game, and I was way out of practice, and I died a ton on what should have been pretty simple and obvious jumps. And picking up items has always been an adventure unto itself in these titles. Your instinct will be to stand on top of items and execute the pickup action, which is pressing diagonally down in the button. But you'll miss the item if you do that. You have to position yourself next to the item so your ninja's hand touches the item when he bends down. Sure, it's authentic to how the game was back in 1987, but come on guys, an option to fix what was awkward 39 years ago sure would have been nice. Now, I still like the game overall, and I dig its concept of mixing action and puzzle elements together with what were pretty spiffy graphics and music for the time. The Last Ninja was and is a fun, if frustrating, adventure game, and it stood out from the crowd back in its time thanks to its themes and execution. If you absolutely loved The Last Ninja when it was new and you haven't played it in several years or maybe decades, you might find that it doesn't quite hold up as well these days. But I still think anyone that enjoyed it when it was new will probably still enjoy it now to some degree. And if you want to see how beloved this game was in its own time, check out the contemporary review scores for the C64 version. Now, we only get the C64 version of The Last Ninja. Sort of. As I mentioned a bit ago, Ninja Remix includes what is essentially the Amiga port of the first Last Ninja title, and I'd suggest the Amiga version as the best way for most people to experience the original game in the series, especially if you've never played it before. Ninja Remix on the Amiga is a little more beginner-friendly as it's really easy to stun-lock enemies in combat, especially after getting and equipping weapons. It also looks and sounds nicer than the older C64 original. Now you might think that the C64 and Amiga were the only platforms to receive a version of the first title in the series. If you think that, well, you're wrong! The original title appeared on several other platforms, even the Apple IIgs, and even that device oh so familiar to school children across the UK, the BBC Micro. Unfortunately, no other versions are included in this collection. Oh, and one more note here. There is an NES game called The Last Ninja, but it is actually a modified port of the second game in the series, not the first one, and it's also not in this collection. Speaking of The Last Ninja 2, let's move on to that one. The second game in the series brought the ninja action and adventure to a much more contemporary setting in good old Manhattan. You start out on the roof of a building that has a drum set on it, and inside there are studio lights and cabling and stuff. So the message from the developers was clear. This one is in a world much more like our own. Now the collection includes the C64, Amiga, and Spectrum versions of The Last Ninja 2. Gameplay-wise, aside from the updated setting and some minor refinements, the actual play mechanics are pretty similar to the first. Picking things up is still a pain, combat still isn't all that great, and some of the jumps are still kind of maddening due to the controls. Pretty much all of these problems can be overcome with a lot of practice, which is how we used to do things in the old days. There are improvements to the original game here and there, but personally I found them to be pretty minor. This one does put a bit more of an emphasis on puzzle solving, so if you like that aspect of the original and wish there was more, well, here you go. Now, some of the solutions on what to do or where to go next can be a smidge esoteric, and any modern gamer sitting down with something like this for the very first time will probably want to hit up a guide and see what to do and where to go next and when and how to use items. Regarding The Last Ninja 2, I feel like the C64 version is the one to play, followed a bit behind by the more sluggish but visually more detailed Amiga version, with the ugly and difficult to play Spectrum version bringing up the rear in a distant third place. Now, as with the first game, you might want to try just running past enemies instead of fighting them when you can. This game puts a greater emphasis on combat, and downed enemies will eventually recover and get back up with full health. That makes it less worthwhile to engage them, if you ask me. In what will become a familiar refrain, I think this is another game that you will really get the most out of if you experienced it back when it was new. It's not beginner-friendly at all. And aside from that, it's got its quirks. I always found some items or objects a little hard to see in either the C64 or Amiga versions, but not the same items in the different versions of the game. The problem is that some things blend in a little too much to their backgrounds, which might lead you to unnecessarily backtrack quite a bit. But again, once you get the hang of The Last Ninja 2, or more likely, re-get the hang of it, as the case may be, it's still a fun ninja in the big city type of adventure. Now I'll note here that the C64 version of Ninja Remix is a slightly updated version of The Last Ninja 2 with some new elements like a new intro, new music, and some other minor changes. Is it better than the original? That's probably mostly going to depend on how you feel about the new music versus the original, really. The final game of the Last Ninja trilogy, The Last Ninja 3, doesn't stray too far from the basic mechanics of the first two games, but it does add a little bit more complexity to the mix and a whole lot more fighting. Personally, this is far and away my least favorite game in the series. We have versions included for the C64 and Amiga for this one. The C64 version feels a bit better and more responsive overall. The Amiga version, aside from feeling a tad more sluggish, also includes enemies that recover way too fast after you knock them out. We're talking a few seconds here. Pretty often, after you knock an enemy down, you'll notice that you don't even have time to go and find and pick up an item on the same screen before that enemy is up and right on top of you, punching you in the face again. And since this one actively encourages you to fight with its honor system, you'll find yourself in near constant battle, and the combat still doesn't feel much better than the prior games, and there's still plenty of awkward jumping too. Now, if you love Last Ninja 3, hey, more power to you. You do you and other such platitudes. For everyone else, this is going to be a tough game to sit down and play for more than 3 minutes, and maybe even less than that for the Amiga version, and its unforgiving enemy recovery rates. Personally, I like the first two games, but I don't really like this one. Alright, so now it's time to move on from the last Ninja titles in the collection to International Karate. It's an old-school one-on-one karate points fighter, and in the collection we have versions for the C64 and Spectrum. It's a fun and fast-paced game that was in a pretty full genre back in the day. There were loads of pre-fighting game boom one-on-one karate games just like this one that were very often quite similar to one another. International Karate helped differentiate itself from the others a bit by playing a little bit faster and smoother than similar fare like Way of the Exploding Fist. Now this is a point-based karate game where each successful hit nets the fighter either a full or half point. The action doesn't exactly flow naturally here as the game stops every time a blow is landed. Lots of old games in the genre work that way. Data East's Karate Champ had been kind of the model for a while. Hey, did you know that that game was actually developed by Technos, the same company that went on to make Renegade and, more importantly, Double Dragon? Anyway, back to International Karate. The C64 version is pretty decent. The Spectrum version is kinda terrible except for the fairly impressive voice samples. But I'm sure which version you'll prefer almost depends entirely on which one you played growing up. And that's all the time I'm going to spend on this one. Why? Because its follow-up, IK Plus, is also included in the collection and really might be the star of the whole show. Alright folks, here's IK Plus. And while this game will also likely appeal most to those with nostalgia for it, I think IK Plus is the one game in this collection that can most easily be appreciated by modern audiences. This follow-up to International Karate is a better experience in every way. I mainly played IK Plus on the Amiga back when it was new, and had a ton of fun with it. It adds a third combatant to the mix, and even though it uses a point system still, the game doesn't stop after every hit like the last one. When you land a blow, the opponent you struck gets knocked down temporarily, and then the fight continues. And this will keep going until either somebody scores the required number of points, or the time runs out. The two players in the field with the highest number of points go on to the next round. This makes this game a lot faster and a much more streamlined experience. Some of the moveset has also been altered a bit, and you'll even have a fancy backflip maneuver now. On the Amiga, IK Plus looks okay. It was never visually top tier for the system, but it's still the best looking version of the game. The C64 version is very similar, with less detail and chunkier graphics, but it still looks great for the platform. And in this case, even the Spectrum version, despite its lack of color, to prevent the dreaded color clash that it was famous for, is actually pretty good too, and it's easily the best of the Spectrum games in this collection. The music is also pretty good in all three versions, with the Amiga version sounding the best. The Amiga version also features the best sound effects, harkening back to those mid-80s Saturday afternoons when you'd find a martial arts movie on either network TV or syndication. Yep, that stuff used to be on TV every week. For us, it was mostly on good old Channel 5. Now, aside from the smooth and fast-paced action during your bouts, you'll get to enter a bonus round. The bonus round is pretty fast and intense as you're assaulted by what seems like a limitless barrage of balls. But you can actually survive if you're good enough at deflecting them. The balls get faster and the sound that plays when you hit them gets higher pitched every single time you deflect one. Surviving is tough, but doable. So if you want to play a different kind of fast-paced fighting game for a few minutes, then you'll probably have some real fun with this one. Now obviously it doesn't have the depth of stuff like Street Fighter, Virtua Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and other series that continue to this very day, but it is one of the best examples of this point system karate subgenre. Again, for me, this is the best game in the collection, and the one that I think pretty much any gamer will be able to just pick up and play and enjoy. And we go from the best game in the collection to what is unquestionably the worst. What you're looking at now is Bangkok Nights, spelled with a KN. It was mildly impressive visually for when it came out on the C64 in 1987, and then later the Amiga in 1989. Today, it's definitely nothing special, quite far from it. The biggest problem with this game is the gameplay is absolutely atrocious. It's simple, dull, and flat out annoying. The backgrounds are just kind of there and not very detailed, which is especially a shame in the Amiga version. Blows barely feel like they connect, and if you think any classic and popular fighting games are button mashers, well, Bangkok Nights wants them to hold its beer. On the C64, we get super chunky but huge low-res characters. On the Amiga, the fighters have a lot more detail but are still pretty ugly. The C64 version is a little more responsive than the Amiga version. Both versions have below-average music, but the Amiga soundtrack is the better of the two. This is a game that I didn't like when it was new, and I have even less tolerance for it now. Bangkok Nights is the only stinker in this collection. It might be worth checking out for a laugh or two, but I can't imagine anyone sitting down to play this exhausting, shallow button masher for more than a minute or so at a time. And really, it's not even worth spending any more time on this game. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. In summary, the Last Ninja Collection is a decent collection of multiple versions of classic computer games. As for what it does right, the emulation of these games is well done and preserves the original experiences they offered very well. The games themselves vary a bit in quality, and some feel a bit archaic by modern standards, but this collection is aimed squarely at people who have nostalgia for these games because they love them growing up. If you were a big Last Ninja diehard, you'll really like this collection. Even if you fall into that category though, you'll probably still wish they had added a few more modern conveniences to games in the collection. Despite that, System 3 at least didn't screw any of the games up, which isn't something that can be said for every collection of classic games. The Last Ninja Collection goes for just under $30 on modern platforms, so if you're looking to relive these classics and some not-so-classics bundled together, this isn't a bad way to do that. But like I said before, if you have zero nostalgia for these games, this collection won't make a believer out of you. Adding some more modern conveniences would have made them more accessible to newcomers to the series. I really wish they had done that. In the end, I'm giving the Last Ninja Collection plus bonus games a 7 out of 10. For a final smidge of context, I'd played everything in this package years ago except for The Last Ninja 3. I'm kind of the target audience for this game collection, so with that in mind, I found it to be pretty decent. I think it'd be easier to recommend even to fans if it were $10 cheaper, but we got the price we got, for now. Alrighty, your turn folks. Tell me what you think about the games in the Last Ninja Collection. Did you play these games yourselves? Had you seen them before? Did you play any when they were new? Do you only know them from that AVGN episode? Were you an IK Plus fan back in the day? Tell me all about it in the comments. That'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like and share it online somewhere. That's the only way my little channel here can grow. If you want to support the work I do here, you can do that on Patreon, Ko-fi, or right here on YouTube through super thanks and channel memberships. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.